Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into the life of Admiral David Farragut, one of America's, well, truly iconic naval figures.
Right.
But we're not just looking at the famous battles. Our mission here is to go deeper, look at the early life, the specific events, maybe even the accidental moments, and definitely the intellectual grind that shaped him. How did he become the Union's greatest sea commander?
And it's fascinating because, as you know, his biggest fame came so late in life. We're using Captain A.T. Mahan's biography. Mahan himself, of course, a brilliant naval thinker.
A master strategist analyzing another.
Exactly. And Mahan's whole point is that Farragut's success, like taking New Orleans when he was almost 61, wasn't some sudden flash of genius.
Right, it wasn't out of nowhere.
Not at all. Mahan argues very convincingly, I think, that it was the result of, well, 5 decades of constant professional work, learning, preparing, just laying the groundwork year after year. So when the moment finally came, he was ready. Even for greatness he probably hadn't foreseen.
Okay, so let's unpack that. His origin story isn't what you might expect, maybe not a New England shipbuilding town or anything. It starts, well, on the frontier. Tell us about his father, George Farragut.
George is quite a character himself. An immigrant from Minorca, that's in Spain, arrives in North America right in 1776.
Perfect timing for the revolution.
And he jumps right in, serves gallantly. But after the war, he doesn't settle somewhere easy. He takes his family to the edge of civilization, basically. North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, borderlands.
So, pretty rough environment for a family.
Definitely not stable or quiet. Constant tension. Young David, who interestingly was actually named George at birth, his earliest memories were shaped by this.
And Mahan gives their incredible anecdote, right, about his mother.
He does. It's almost cinematic. His mother, Elizabeth Shine, she's standing guard at the cabin door with an axe.
An axe? Seriously?
Yes, against a party of Native Americans approaching. Meanwhile, young David gets hustled up into the loft for safety. Imagine that being one of your first memories.
Wow. That idea of immediate threat defending the home, that's got to leave a mark.
Absolutely. Constant readiness, a certain hardness of spirit, maybe. It's baked in early on.
That definitely sounds like a powerful psychological foundation, but the real turning point, the event that just fundamentally redirects his life and puts him on the path to the Navy, that comes out of tragedy.
It does, yeah. Yellow fever was devastating back then. In 1808, it sweeps through their area. David's mother dies. And on the very same day, a Commander Porter, this is David Dixon Porter's father, Commodore David Porter, who was stationed nearby and visiting, he also succumbs to the fever.
Wait, his mother and Commander Porter died the same day?
The same day. And apparently Porter, before he got sick, had become fond of the Farragut family and had actually offered to adopt one of the children.
Just offered to adopt one. Was that a common thing for naval officers back then? Seems unusual.
It speaks to the tight-knit, sometimes brutal reality of early American life, especially in the service communities. Adoption itself wasn't maybe commonplace like today, but patronage was huge. Looking after the sons of comrades, especially fallen ones, securing their future. That was definitely part of the code.
And young David, he accepts.
He does. The story goes he was just dazzled by the commander's uniform and also the uniform of Porter's older son, who was already a midshipman. So he says yes, moves to New Orleans with his new guardian, Commodore Porter's family now. It's a complete break. He even changes his first name from George to David, likely in honor of his new guardian.
A total identity shift. And almost immediately, he's in the Navy.
Incredibly fast. Just a few months later, he gets his midshipman's warrant. It's dated December 17th, 1810.
Making him how old?
9.5. Just 9.5 years old. Now, Mahan calls him a titular officer at this point, meaning he held the rank, he drew the pay, but he wasn't really expected to perform the full duties yet. He was too young. But crucially, it meant his entire upbringing, his education, his moral compass, from that point on, is forged within the Navy under Porter's influence.
And that early entry leads almost straight into a key learning moment, right? The Havana incident. This is where he gets his first real taste of national insult.
Yeah, he's traveling north on the bomb ketch Vesuvius. They stop in Havana. And there, the young Farragut, he's maybe 10. Now, here's the story. The U.S. Navy brig Vixen had recently been fired upon by a British warship nearby.
Fired upon without cause.
Pretty much, just asserting dominance. And Farragut later wrote about it. He said it was the first thing that caused in me bad feeling toward the English nation.
He felt it personally, saw it as an insult to be paid in kind.
Exactly. And you really need to understand the context here because this feeling ties directly into the whole mess of impressment and neutral rights that's pushing the U.S. and Britain towards the War of 1812.
Right. Britain's fighting Napoleon desperately needs sailors.
Desperately.
Yeah.
So they claim this, right, this indefeasible allegiance, basically saying any British-born sailor owes service to the crown no matter where he is.
Which meant stopping American ships on the high seas.
Stopping neutral American merchant ships, boarding them, and forcibly taking sailors they claimed were British subjects. Often they weren't. It was just kidnapping, essentially, impressment.
And the U.S. position was clear this was illegal.
Absolutely. The U.S. insisted on the simple, undeniable right that its flag protected everyone sailing under it. But the British argument, as Mahan points out, wasn't really about law. It was pure necessity. Their survival depended on the Royal Navy, and they weren't going to let sailors escape service onto American ships.
But the core issue, and what clearly angered young Farragut, was that American protests just weren't working. Britain basically ignored them.
Why? Because the U.S. Navy was tiny, numerically weak. Mahan really stresses this point. If America had had a more substantial navy, maybe a credible threat.
Britain might have thought twice.
Exactly. The potential cost of provoking a real fight might have outweighed the benefit of grabbing a few sailors. But without that military force to show upon the sea, America's diplomatic complaints, its utterances, as Mahan puts it, they just commanded no respect.
So Farragut internalized this lesson early. Weakness invites aggression, national humiliation.
Deeply. It stuck with him his entire life.
And you see that spark, that personal reaction to insult flare up almost immediately. He's still just 10, serving in Norfolk, and gets into that famous brawl.
Oh yeah, the pre-war fire anecdote. It's fantastic. He's the midshipman in charge of the captain's gig, basically, the captain's boat. Some dock loungers just hanging around, start mocking him. Probably because he's so young, trying to act like an officer. They sprinkle him with water from an old pot.
A direct challenge to his uniform, his authority.
Right. And Farragut doesn't back down. He doesn't run off crying. He joins his boat crew, who immediately grabbed the boat stretchers, the wooden planks used to carry passengers.
Improvised weapon.
Totally. And Farragut, this 10-year-old kid, waving his little midshipman's dirk, leads the charge. They fight their way off the wharf right up to Market Square.
Cheering them on, apparently.
He was. Until the police finally step in and break it up, the little officer actually gets formally bound over to keep the peace.
Incredible. It just shows that spirit of battle, as Mahan says, was already there. He wasn't going to tolerate insult, personal or national. Ready for a fight, ready to take charge, even at 10. Okay, so that fighting spirit gets tested, really tested, almost immediately. He's just turned 11 when the War of 1812 breaks out, and he joins his guardian, now Captain Porter, on the frigate USS ESSEX. And the Essex itself is kind of special, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The Essex has this amazing backstory. It wasn't built by the government. It was funded and built entirely by the citizens of Salem, Massachusetts.
Just the townspeople chipped in.
Yeah, back in 1798-99, it was pure local patriotism. They were furious about French attacks on American shipping, the French spoliation decrees, and they decided they needed their own warship to protect their merchant fleets. So they built the Essex.
That's incredible. A community-funded warship.
And she quickly became legendary. First U.S. warship to round the Cape of Good Hope, down by Africa, and then later, the first to go around Cape Horn, at the tip of South America.
Which brings us right to the start of the war, and Captain Porter's really audacious plan, the Pacific Gambit. He was supposed to meet up with other ships.
Right. He was ordered to join a squadron under Commodore Bainbridge for a long cruise. But he couldn't find them. They missed the rendezvous point. So instead of turning back,
He just went for it.
he did. Mahan praises his admirable promptitude. Porter decides, okay, we'll do the mission alone. He's blockaded for a bit, but then slips out and sails the Essex south, heading for the Pacific. It was January 1813.
Sailing into the Pacific alone. I mean, that's thousands of miles from any friendly port. What about supplies?
That was the huge risk. They were completely cut off, no chance of resupply. Porter put the crew on tight rations immediately, specifically half allowance of bread for 3 months straight. It was an immense gamble.
And the journey itself, getting around Cape Horn, notoriously brutal waters.
Brutal is the word. It took them 21 days. Farragut experienced it all as an 11-year-old. Mahan describes it vividly. Furious blasts, the heavy seas, and the bitter weather. Just Relentless.
And there was a specific terrifying incident during that passage.
Yes, a truly massive wave, a rogue sea, basically crashed over the ship. It burst in all the closed gun ports on one side, completely flooded the gun deck, washed ordnance around. Several crew members were actually drowned below decks.
Terrifying, and Farragut witnessed how different men reacted.
He did.
Yeah.
And it clearly made a huge impression. He wrote later, it was the only time in his entire life he saw a real good seaman just paralyzed by fear, totally useless, frozen.
But others stepped up.
Absolutely. He contrasted the paralyzed man with guys like the bosun's mate, William Kingsbury. Kingsbury was just yelling at the panicked sailors. You know, something like, "Damn your eyes, get moving. There's still one side of the ship left." Just pure, defiant, duty-driven energy.
So Farragut learned right there, at age 11, in the middle of this chaos.
He learned that leadership in crisis isn't just about knowing what to do. It's about projecting courage, rejecting panic, rallying others through sheer force of will. That example set by the determined few, it saves everyone else. A profound lesson.
Once they finally made it into the Pacific, Porter really went to work on the British whaling fleet, right?
He decimated it, captured numerous British whalers. They were also dealing with Spanish privateers siding with the British off the coast of Chile, which was itself in revolution against Spain. It was a complex situation.
And amidst all this, young Farragut gets his first real command. A command.
It's amazing. He's 12 years old. Porter had captured a British whaler called the Barclay. He needs someone reliable to take command of this prize ship and sail her, along with other prizes, to Valparaiso, Chile. He picks Farragut.
12 years old, in command of a captured ship and its potentially mutinous crew.
Well, the original captain of the Barclay was still aboard as a prisoner. And this guy, described as a violent-tempered old man, was absolutely incensed that a boy, a midshipman, was now his commander.
He must have tried to push back.
He did. He tried to intimidate Farragut, threatened him, saying he was going to take the ship off course, sail for New Zealand instead of Valparaiso, basically testing the boy's nerve.
And how did Farragut handle it? This is a defining moment.
It really is. Farragut recalled it vividly. He didn't flinch. He called over his most reliable petty officer, his right-hand man, and just gave the order. "I want the main topsail filled," meaning set the sail to get back on course. The petty officer immediately responds, "Aye, aye, sir." Clear authority established.
He asserted himself.
Instantly. Farragut said, "From that moment, I became master of the vessel." He then confronted the old captain directly, warned him not to even come up on deck with his pistols unless he wanted to be thrown overboard.
Wow. At 12?
It taught him right then and there that command wasn't about age or just rank on paper. It was about conviction, resolve, and the absolute readiness to enforce your authority without hesitation.
Incredible story. But despite all these successes, the Royal Navy eventually caught up with the Essex. A superior force arrived.
Yes, the frigate HMS Phoebe, carrying 36 guns, and the sloop of war HMS Cherub, with 24 guns. They found the Essex and its prizes anchored in Valparaiso.
And crucially, the Phoebe had different guns than the Essex.
That was the key tactical difference. The Essex was mostly armed with carronades, short-range, heavy-hitting guns, devastating up close like shotguns. But the Phoebe had long guns, which could hit accurately from a much greater distance.
So the Phoebe could stand off and pound the Essex, while the Essex couldn't effectively shoot back unless it closed the distance.
Precisely. It gave the British captain, Hillier, the huge advantage if he could dictate the range of the battle.
And there was some controversy even before the battle started, right? In the harbor itself, Captain Hillier was actually an old acquaintance of Porter's.
Yes, they knew each other. And Hillier sailed the Phoebe right into Valparaiso Harbor, luffed up, turned into the wind, right between the anchored Essex and one of its prize ships, the Essex Junior. It was an incredibly provocative move.
Putting himself right under the Essex's guns. Why?
The Americans were convinced it was a deliberate test. They believed Hillier had intelligence that maybe half the Essex crew was ashore on liberty, and he was daring Porter to fire, possibly hoping to catch him unprepared or force him to violate Chilean neutrality first.
And Porter?
Porter had his crew at quarters, guns loaded, ready to fire. Farragut was right there, witnessing it all. But Porter held his fire. He chose to respect the neutrality of the Chilean port. Hillier then just drifted back out safely. Mahan implies Porter might have regretted that decision later.
Letting a potential advantage slip away due to strict adherence to neutrality.
Possibly. Weeks of blockade followed. Then the Essex finally tried to make a run for it during a heavy squall. Disaster struck.
What happened?
The squall was too strong. It carried away the Essex's main topmast, crippling the ship. Porter had no choice but to turn back and anchor close to the shore, just inside what should have been neutral waters within pistol shot of the land, Mahan says.
But Hilliard didn't respect the neutrality this time.
Not at all. He saw his chance. The Essex was crippled, unable to maneuver. Hilliard knew exactly how to exploit his long gun advantage. He positioned the Phoebe and Cherub at a distance where their guns could hammer the Essex, but the Essex's carronades couldn't reach them effectively.
A sitting duck, essentially.
Pretty much. The Americans tried desperately. They rigged extra guns out of the stern ports, tried to warp the ship around using anchors, but it was hopeless. It was just a relentless pounding.
How long did the battle last?
2.5 brutal hours. The carnage on the Essex's decks must have been horrific.
And the casualties were staggering.
They were. Mahan lists 58 killed, 66 wounded, and 31 missing or captured who were trying to swim ashore, out of a crew of about 250. A terrible loss.
Farragut, now 13, witnessing all this, what was his final duty?
His last assigned task was to take the ship's signal book, weight it, and drop it overboard so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. A somber end to his first major cruise.
But even in that devastating defeat, there's one last flash of that Farragut spirit, right? The famous pig anecdote.
Yes. After the surrender, the British officers came aboard. One young British midshipman apparently laid claim to a pet pig that Farragut considered his own.
And Farragut wasn't having it.
Not a chance. Even amidst the wreckage and defeat, he challenges the British midshipman. They get into a fistfight, and Farragut apparently thrashes him soundly and reclaims the pig.
Taking some small measure of victory.
Exactly. He later said he took solace that one Briton at least had felt the pangs of defeat. It just perfectly encapsulates his indomitable will, even as a boy.
And Captain Hilliard, the British commander, reportedly saw this and said something quite prophetic to young Farragut.
Yes. Hilliard apparently saw the distraught but defiant boy. Maybe heard about the pig incident and consoled him, saying something like, "Never mind, my little fellow, it will be your turn next, perhaps."
It will be your turn next, perhaps. Incredible foresight given what was to come 50 years later. So that intense, brutal experience on the Essex War, command, defeat, all by age 13, is followed by this incredibly long period of relative peace for the Navy. Nearly 50 years before Farragut gets his chance at major Civil War command. Mahan argues this long peace wasn't wasted time for him, though.
Not at all. For many officers, this period was, well, stagnation, bureaucracy, routine postings, lack of action. Mahan notes that many of Farragut's contemporaries either drifted away, maybe fell into dissipation.
Drinking, gambling, the common vices.
Right. Or they just became stuck in the old ways, comfortable with the routine of the sailing navy. But Farragut seems to have consciously resisted that.
How? What did he do differently?
Well, immediately after the Essex, he was ordered to the brig Spark, separated from Porter. And he found himself among some wild young men, as he put it, prone to dissipation.
And he credits specific officers for helping him stay on track.
He does. He mentions Lieutenants Cock and William Taylor specifically. Their positive influence, their focus on duty, helped him avoid the path that, according to Farragut, led nearly all of his dozen or so messmates on the Spark to disappear from the Navy within just a couple of years.
So he actively sought out good influences and focused on duty.
Exactly. Mahan emphasizes Farragut's innate attraction to the good than by the evil around him. He understood that idleness was the enemy. He used the habit of strict attention to duty, as Mahan calls it, as an anchor. Keep busy, keep learning, stay focused.
And during this period, he also started forming some really important opinions about leadership, specifically about what not to do. Tell us about serving under Captain Creighton.
Yes. Captain Creighton on the ship of the line Washington around 1816. Creighton had a reputation as the greatest martinet in the Navy.
A martinet being?
A super strict, by-the-book disciplinarian, obsessed with regulations, appearances, often imposing harsh or unnecessary punishments to achieve superficial perfection.
And Creighton's ship, the Washington, was apparently very impressive on the surface.
It achieved extreme smartness, Mahan says. Everything polished, every maneuver perfect. But Farragut saw the cost.
Which was?
It came at the sacrifice of the comfort of everyone. Constant pressure, fear, resentment. Farragut looked at this and drew a crucial conclusion for his own future command style.
What was that?
He wrote later that the experience determined me never to have a cracked ship if it was only to be attained by such means. He realized that true combat effectiveness didn't come from terrorizing your crew into superficial perfection. It came from mutual respect, professional competence, and maybe, as he learned on the Essex, that cheerful determination in the face of adversity. He He rejected the martinet model completely.
That's a really key insight into his later success. But maybe the most significant preparation during these long years came much later, when he was a lieutenant. The Veracruz incident in 1838. This wasn't just routine duty, this was active observation of warfare evolving.
This is absolutely pivotal. He's there, observing a French naval squadron under Admiral Baudin attacking the Mexican fortress of San Juan de Ulloa at Veracruz. And he's not just watching, he's analyzing. He's seeing the future, while many naval officers were still stuck in the age of sail and solid shot.
What specifically caught his eye? What technologies or tactics?
Two things, primarily, made a huge impression and directly influenced his thinking later, especially at New Orleans and Mobile Bay.
Okay, the first.
Steam power. Specifically, the use of two small, fairly insignificant French steam tugs.
Tugs, not the main warships.
Right. But these little steamers were indispensable. The battle occurred on a calm day. The big French sailing frigates couldn't maneuver effectively on their own, so the tugs towed them, precisely placing each frigate exactly where Admiral Baudin wanted it to engage the fort.
So steam provided tactical control, independent of the wind.
Precisely. Farragut noted, everything was done by them. The day was calm. Ships had no sails to manage. It was a revelation. Steam meant precision, control, the ability to dictate the terms of engagement, even in unfavorable weather. That lodged in his mind.
Okay, that's huge. And the second observation, it had to do with the type of firepower.
Yes, it was about horizontal shell fire versus traditional vertical bombardment.
Explain that difference.
Okay, traditionally, naval attacks on forts often relied heavily on mortars, either on specialized bomb vessels or landed ashore. Mortars lob explosive shells in a high parabolic arc, hoping to drop them inside the fort's walls. Vertical fire.
Like artillery today, arching over obstacles.
Kind of, but Farragut watched the French mortars firing at San Juan de Ulloa and concluded they were basically useless. He wrote they might have bombarded for a month without success. The shells just weren't doing critical damage to the structure.
But the French frigates were doing something different.
Yes. They were using their main guns, relatively new naval guns for the time, to fire explosive shells on a much flatter trajectory, horizontally, directly at the walls of the fort.
Slamming into the masonry itself. And what was the effect?
San Juan de Ulloa was built mostly of soft coral blocks, thick walls, but soft material. The vertical mortar fire just chipped away at the surface. But the horizontal shell fire, hitting with force, tore the masonry apart. It exploited the structural weakness.
And the result?
The French frigates, using this horizontal shell fire, effectively destroyed the fort's defenses in about 4 hours. 4 hours. Compared to the weeks or months Farragut estimated mortars would have taken.
So the lesson was, find the weak spot and use the right technology, steam for positioning, horizontal shells for impact to hit it hard and fast.
Exactly. That became his core tactical philosophy. Don't waste time with ineffective methods. Identify the vulnerability and apply overwhelming precise force directly to it. Speed, precision, concentration of force. That's the template for New Orleans right there in 1838.
And Mahan emphasizes that Farragut didn't just see this and forget it. He actively processed it.
He did. Farragut himself later stated he made it a rule of my life to note these things with a view to the possible future. He wasn't just a passive observer. He was actively collecting data, analyzing, thinking about how he might use these things someday.
That intellectual diligence is remarkable. It's this, any knowledge might at some time become useful attitude.
That's the key phrase Mahan picks up on. While other officers were perhaps polishing brass or complaining about slow promotion, Farragut was studying, observing, preparing his mind. Even things outside direct naval matters, like attending Smithsonian lectures later in life. He just kept learning.
And this period also showed his personal character, beyond the professional, his devotion to his first wife.
Yes, his first wife, Susan, was an invalid for 16 years, and Farragut showed just incredible, tender, and untiring devotion to her. He personally acted as her faithful and skillful nurse throughout that long illness.
That speaks volumes about his patience, his selflessness, his discipline outside of uniform.
It really does. And at the same time, he's still thinking about improving the service. While stationed on a receiving ship in Norfolk, he took the initiative to organize a school for the illiterate ship's boys. He saw a need and acted on it.
So you have this incredibly prepared, observant, diligent, and morally grounded officer. Yet when the Mexican War comes along in the 1840s, a chance for action, his career kind of stalls.
It's deeply ironic. He applies repeatedly for command, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, an area he knew intimately. He specifically mentioned his observations from Veracruz, arguing the Navy should aggressively attack the Mexican coastal forts like San Juan de Ulloa.
The very fort he saw the French reduce so effectively.
Exactly. He knew how to do it. But his applications were consistently ignored, passed over.
Why? Was it just bad luck? Politics?
Mahan suggests it was because his ideas, his push for aggressive action using steam and shellfire, ran directly counter to the routine prejudices of the day.
Meaning the old guard, the senior officers?
The older generation of sailing masters, the cautious bureaucracy in the Navy Department, they likely distrusted steam, distrusted aggressive tactics against forts, maybe distrusted Farragut's perceived enthusiasm. They stuck to the old playbook.
So he was literally too far ahead of his time, and it cost him a command in wartime.
It seems so. His frustration must have been immense. He even made a rather bitter prophetic comment later, saying if the Navy had taken that castle back then, the cautious old officers who blocked it would have paid a price. Not one of them will wear an admiral's flag, which they might have done. He knew he was ready for responsibility, ready for the future of naval warfare, long before the institution was ready for him.
Though they did eventually recognize his diligence, right, with the Mare Island appointment.
Yes. Finally, in 1854, they showed significant trust by appointing him the first commandant of the brand new Mare Island Navy Yard in California, a huge administrative responsibility, building a major base from scratch. And even while doing that, he's still learning, still preparing, attending those Smithsonian lectures whenever he was back in Washington. That lifelong habit of intellectual curiosity never stopped.
Okay, so this long period of preparation, of diligent learning, of sometimes frustrating waiting, it all comes to a head in 1860-61. Farragut returns to Norfolk, Virginia, his home for many years, his wife's home state, and he walks right into the secession crisis.
Right into the firestorm. The pressure on Southern-born officers, especially those settled in the South like Farragut was in Norfolk, was absolutely immense.
Friends, neighbors, maybe even family, all pulling him towards loyalty to Virginia.
Absolutely. The emotional ties were incredibly strong. Most naval officers from the South did resign and go with their states. It was a wrenching personal decision for hundreds of men.
But Farragut, his loyalty was elsewhere.
His loyalty was clear. Mahan says he developed settled principles of allegiance to the Union over his 50 years in the Navy. His entire life, his identity, was bound up with the U.S. Navy and the flag he served. For him, loyalty to the nation trumped loyalty to the state or region.
So when Virginia actually seceded after Fort Sumter, his decision was immediate.
Immediate and absolute. There's that famous confrontation with his Norfolk neighbors. They were celebrating secession, trying to persuade him, maybe mocking his Union loyalty.
Calling him Granny and Croker for being pessimistic about secession.
Right. And Farragut's response was just blunt. I cannot live here. I owe allegiance to one government, and I am going north. He told them they'd regret this decision. And then he packed up his family and left Norfolk that very day, moving north to Hastings-on-Hudson, New York.
That took incredible moral courage to just walk away from his home, his community, potentially face accusations of treason from his neighbors.
It was a defining act of principle. And that strength of character, that absolute clarity about his duty, did not go unnoticed in Washington.
Which leads directly to his big chance. 1861, the Navy needs someone to command the Western Gulf Blockading Squadron. The mission: take New Orleans. The biggest naval operation of the war so far.
And Farragut gets the call.
Yeah.
Assistant Secretary of the Navy Gustavus Fox was key in selecting him. Fox met with Farragut and was, as he later said, most favorably impressed with him.
Although Fox apparently had one slight reservation.
Yeah, Fox admitted he thought Farragut might be too enthusiastic, maybe a bit too eager, potentially reckless. But ultimately, Fox saw that enthusiasm, combined with Farragut's obvious experience and determination, as exactly what was needed for such a high-stakes mission. He bet on Farragut's energy.
And Farragut finally getting this major command after 50 years, he immediately showed that independent thinking shaped by Veracruz, didn't he?
Right away.
Yeah.
The plan initially involved a large flotilla of mortar boats. Porter's son, David Dixon Porter, was actually in command of them. The idea was to bombard Forts Jackson and St. Philip into submission before the fleet tried to pass.
Standard procedure, maybe? Vertical bombardment.
Exactly. And Farragut privately confessed he had no faith in it. He'd seen mortars fail against San Juan de Ulloa 20-plus years earlier. He knew it would be slow, costly, and likely ineffective against well-built forts.
So what was his feeling taking on command?
Pure self-reliance and determination. He wrote to his family just before sailing, "I shall sail in 3 weeks. The rest depends upon myself." He knew the plan might be flawed, the risks enormous, but he accepted the responsibility fully. The outcome rested on his shoulders, his decisions, his leadership. He was finally getting his turn.
So Farragut takes command, heads for the Gulf. His official orders are pretty clear, right? He's supposed to reduce the forts Jackson and St. Philip, guarding the Mississippi approach to New Orleans before he proceeds upriver.
Yes, the orders were explicit on that. Bombard them with the mortar flotilla, compel their surrender, then take the fleet up to the city.
But Farragut, based on his Veracruz experience and his own instincts, immediately saw a problem with that.
A huge problem. Delay. He knew that stopping to engage in a lengthy, uncertain bombardment would give the Confederates time. Time to reinforce New Orleans, time to bring down more gunboats or fire rafts, time for something unexpected to happen. He wrote that, "Whatever is to be done will have to be done quickly, or we shall be again reduced to a blockading squadron."
Meaning they'd lose momentum, maybe suffer losses, and end up just sitting outside, unable to take the main prize.
Exactly. So he favored a different approach, what Mahan calls a strategy of combination.
Which was?
Basically, don't stop to destroy the forts first. Run past them, dash through their fire, get the fleet above them, cut them off from New Orleans. Then land troops, who are accompanying the expedition under General Butler, to attack the forts from the rear while the fleet threatened the city. Isolate, then conquer. Speed celerity was the key.
Bold. Very bold. But first, there was a physical obstacle in the river itself. The Confederates had blocked the channel.
Yes, a formidable barrier. They'd anchored a line of hulks across the river, connected by massive iron chains, right under the guns of the forts. The fleet couldn't just sail through.
So how did they breach it?
That required another act of incredible daring, this time by Lieutenant Charles Caldwell, commanding the gunboat Itasca. Under cover of darkness, Caldwell steamed the Itasca right at one of the anchored hulks.
He rammed it.
He charged it, aiming to use the ship's momentum to break the chains. The Itasca actually rose bodily 3 or 4 feet from the water as it hit the chains slung between the hulks. The strain was immense, but Caldwell kept the engines going, dragging the hulks downstream until finally the chains snapped.
Wow. Just brute force creates the opening.
It created a practical breach, as Mahan says. Just enough room for the main fleet to squeeze through 1 or 2 ships at a time. That physical gap was essential for Farragut's plan to work.
Okay, the barrier is breached. The mortar bombardment goes on for days, largely ineffective as Farragut suspected. Finally, he decides it's time to run the forts. April 24th, 1862.
He makes the call. And his guiding philosophy for the attack is perfectly captured in his general order to the fleet. He told his captains, "The best protection against the enemy's fire is a well-directed fire from our own guns."
Meaning, don't try to hide, don't slow down.
Exactly. Go fast, shoot fast, overwhelm the enemy with your own firepower. Don't be a passive target, be the aggressor. Audacity as defense.
He leads the way in his flagship, the Hartford. What was the passage like?
Utter chaos. Pitch dark, illuminated only by muzzle flashes and burning fire rafts the Confederates sent down a river. The forts alleged everything they had. The noise must have been deafening. The Hartford itself actually ran aground for a terrifying few minutes right under Fort St. Philip's guns. A Confederate tug tried to push a fire raft against her side.
How did Farragut react?
Complete coolness under fire. He directed the efforts to extinguish the flames, ordered the guns to keep firing, and calmly worked the ship off the shoal. His nerve held, and the fleet followed.
Mahan points out one tactical critique, though. Something he considers the only serious fault in Farragut's plan for the passage. What was that?
It was about the order of battle. Farragut allowed the relatively small, lightly armed gunboat Cayuga, commanded by Captain Theodorus Bailey, his second-in-command, to lead the entire column of heavy warships past the forts.
Why was that a fault? Seems like an honor to lead.
It was an honor, and that was the problem. Bailey desperately wanted to lead the van. A laudable wish, Mahan concedes. Farragut granted it, likely out of generosity or respect for a senior captain, but tactically it was wrong. The lead ship takes the most concentrated initial fire. It should be the strongest ship, the one best able to absorb punishment and punch back, setting the tone for the whole column.
And the Cayuga wasn't strong enough.
No, she was brave but vulnerable. She was hit 42 times, suffered heavy casualties, and was nearly overwhelmed before the heavier ships behind her could draw the fire. Mahan argues Farragut let personal consideration override sound tactical principle in this one instance. It shows maybe a slight weakness, stemming perhaps from his rejection of that rigid, impersonal martinet style he disliked.
Interesting nuance. But despite that specific critique, the overall result of running the forts was a stunning success.
Absolutely stunning. Once the main fleet was past the forts and heading for New Orleans, the strategic situation changed instantly. The city was essentially defenseless against the naval guns. It surrendered almost without a fight a few days later.
And the forts, Jackson and St. Philip.
Completely isolated, their supply lines cut, facing a victorious fleet upstream and army troops downstream. Their garrisons mutinied and surrendered shortly after. Farragut's gamble, his focus on celerity, paid off spectacularly.
Mahan calls the result physical, undeniable, fatal for the Confederacy in that region.
It was. New Orleans was the South's largest city, its main financial center, and its most important port on the Gulf. Controlling the mouth of the Mississippi was a massive strategic blow. It was arguably the Union's most important single victory of the war up to that point.
And it had ripple effects far beyond the battlefield, didn't it? International consequences.
Hugely important ones. Mahan states quite clearly, based on reports at the time, that both France under Napoleon III and Great Britain were very close to officially recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation.
Which would have been a disaster for the Union. Potential military aid, loans.
It could have changed the entire course of the war. But the news of the fall of New Orleans, this decisive, undeniable Union victory, reached Europe just in time. It halted that momentum toward recognition. Farragut's audacity didn't just capture a city. It likely prevented foreign intervention and helped save the Union cause on the world stage.
So, after the incredible triumph at New Orleans, you'd think Farragut might get a breather. But the Navy Department in Washington had other ideas. They immediately started pushing him to take his fleet up the Mississippi.
Yeah, almost immediately. The goal was to push nearly 900 miles upriver from the Gulf to meet the Union's Western River Flotilla, which was coming down from the north. The strategic aim was to seize control of the entire river, splitting the Confederacy in two.
Makes sense on a map, but Farragut had serious reservations, right? This went against his professional judgment again.
Deeply. This is where you see that classic tension between the armchair strategists in Washington looking at maps and the commander on the scene dealing with the brutal realities of logistics and geography.
What were his main concerns? It wasn't just about fighting forts anymore.
No, the challenge was completely different. As Farragut saw it, pushing hundreds of deep-draft, ocean-going warships that far up a long, narrow, tortuous, and very difficult road, the Mississippi River was a logistical nightmare waiting to happen.
How so? What were the specific problems?
Maintaining communications over that distance was incredibly hard. Resupplying coal for the steamships was a constant struggle, with hostile territory on both banks, ensuring security against guerrilla attacks, snipers, potential ambushes along hundreds of miles of riverbank. It was fundamentally different from a coastal blockade or a dash past fixed forts. He felt the department was asking him to attempt impossibilities.
And when he finally did get his fleet upriver to Vicksburg, Mississippi in the summer of 1862, what did he find?
He found exactly what his instincts probably told him he would. Vicksburg wasn't like New Orleans, sitting on low ground, vulnerable to naval gunfire. Vicksburg sat high on imposing bluffs overlooking a sharp bend in the river.
The terrain favored the defenders.
Massively. The Confederate artillery was well protected up in those hills, shielded from direct naval fire. The ships down on the river were exposed targets. It was the opposite of the San Juan de Ulloa situation he'd analyzed.
So no obvious weak spot for his ships to exploit.
None that ships alone could reach. Farragut quickly concluded that Vicksburg was simply not possible to take without an army. He estimated needing 12 or 15,000 soldiers to attack from the landward side while the Navy supported. The department's idea that the fleet could just sail up and compel surrender was, well, naive.
He must have been incredibly frustrated, stuck in this difficult river environment, facing an impossible task set by Washington.
He was. His letters home from this period are full of bitterness and exhaustion. He wrote things like, "They will keep us in this river until the vessels break down. Now they expect impossibilities. You can feel the strain." But even then, his sense of duty held firm. "I will do my duty to the best of my ability." He ran the Vicksburg batteries, met the upper flotilla, but achieved little strategically without Army support.
The situation gets even worse later when some of the Union ironclads operating above Vicksburg are lost or captured, right? The Indianola, the Queen of the West.
Yes, those losses were a major blow. It highlighted the vulnerability of operating so deep in enemy territory. And it spurred Farragut to take another incredibly audacious independent action. He realized he absolutely had to do something to cut off the flow of supplies coming out of the Red River.
The Red River Valley being,
Yeah.
why was it so important?
It was basically the Confederacy's breadbasket and supply depot west of the Mississippi. Huge amounts of food, cattle, war materials flowed down the Red River, crossed the Mississippi, and supplied Confederate armies further east, especially the besieged garrison at Vicksburg. Cutting that lifeline was strategically crucial.
So how did he plan to do it? The main Confederate stronghold blocking access was Port Hudson, Louisiana, another bluff-top fortress downstream from Vicksburg, but upstream from Baton Rouge.
Exactly. Port Hudson was formidable. And Farragut decided in March 1863 that he had to run its batteries, get some ships above it, and patrol the Mississippi between Port Hudson and Vicksburg to interdict that Red River traffic.
Okay, another dangerous run past powerful forts. But this time, there was a crucial difference in how he approached it, wasn't there, regarding orders?
Yes. This time, he did it without specific orders from the Navy Department. In fact, he deliberately avoided asking for permission.
Why?
He feared they'd say no. The department was becoming increasingly cautious about risking its valuable ocean-going warships so far upriver, especially after the Vicksburg difficulties and the loss of the ironclads. They might have seen it as too risky, a secondary objective. But Farragut, on the scene, saw the absolute strategic necessity of cutting the Red River supplies.
So he just went for it, risking his career potentially if it failed.
That's the fearlessness of responsibility Mahan highlights. He weighed the strategic imperative against the risk of censure and decided the mission was too important to wait for bureaucratic approval that might never come.
What happened during the Port Hudson passage? Was it as chaotic as New Orleans?
It was arguably worse and less successful tactically. The Confederates were ready. The river currents were tricky. Farragut's flagship, the Hartford, actually ran hard aground directly under the Confederate batteries while trying to navigate the bend.
A nightmare scenario. How did they get off?
Pure Farragut grit. Under intense fire, he directed efforts, kept the crew focused, used the small accompanying gunboat Albatross lashed alongside, and the ship's own engines to basically twist and drag the Hartford free. An incredible feat of seamanship and nerve.
But not all the ships made it through.
No, the dash was only partially successful. Only the Hartford and the little Albatross managed to get past the batteries. Several other ships were turned back by the heavy fire or grounding, and the large steam frigate Mississippi, a veteran ship, ran aground, couldn't be refloated under fire, and had to be abandoned and burned by her own crew. A significant loss.
So tactically a mixed result at best. Only 2 ships got through. But strategically.
Strategically, it was a masterstroke. Even those 2 ships, the powerful Hartford and the nimble Albatross patrolling that stretch of the Mississippi between Port Hudson and Vicksburg, were enough. They completely shut down the Red River supply route.
Severed the lifeline.
Completely. Admiral David Dixon Porter, commanding the river fleet further north, immediately recognized the impact. He wrote to Farragut saying his getting ships past Port Hudson was, at this moment, the severest blow that could be struck at the South. Port Hudson itself was now completely cut off from supplies. Its eventual fall, along with Vicksburg's, was now pretty much inevitable, largely thanks to Farragut's independent, risky decision.
But the toll on him, on his crews, operating in that hostile river environment for so long, it must have been immense.
Devastating. Disease was rampant, the heat, the stress, the constant danger. Farragut himself was clearly feeling the strain deeply by this point. Reflecting on the constant pressure and the mental burden of command during these river campaigns, he wrote that line. "What the fight was to my poor brains, neither you nor anyone else will ever be able to comprehend." You can just feel the exhaustion in those words. After the grueling Mississippi campaigns, Farragut eventually gets some rest, but then comes the call for his final and perhaps most famous campaign, the attack on Mobile Bay in August 1864.
Mobile, Alabama, another major Confederate port on the Gulf, and Farragut had wanted to attack it much earlier, hadn't he?
Well, yes. He bitterly regretted the delay. He had advocated for attacking Mobile almost 2 years earlier, right after New Orleans, when its defenses were weaker. But the resources, particularly Army cooperation, weren't available then.
And that delay had consequences. The Confederates used the time well.
They did. They heavily fortified the 2 forts guarding the entrance to the bay, Fort Morgan and Fort Gaines. They laid down rows of underwater mines, which they called torpedoes, and most critically, they built a monster of an ironclad ram, the CSS Tennessee.
So the challenge was significantly greater now because of the delay.
Much greater. Farragut knew his basic strategy still applied: run past the forts, get inside the bay, cut off the city from the sea, force its surrender. But now, dealing with the forts and the torpedoes and the Tennessee required a different kind of force. He insisted he needed ironclad monitors to lead the attack alongside his wooden ships.
His preparation for Mobile, though, it shows that lifetime of experience. He wasn't just relying on firepower, he was thinking about nature itself.
Absolutely meticulous. Mahan highlights how Farragut waited specifically for two natural conditions to align before launching the attack.
What were they?
First, a flood tide and incoming tide. Why? Because if any of his ships were damaged and losing power while running past Fort Morgan, the incoming current would help carry them into the bay, rather than leaving them helpless under the fort's guns. Clever.
Very clever use of currents. And the second condition?
A west wind. He wanted the wind blowing from the west, across the channel towards Fort Morgan on the eastern side. This way, the immense clouds of gun smoke from his own fleet's broadsides would be blown onto the fort, obscuring the vision of the Confederate gunners trying to aim at his ships.
Using smoke as a screen generated by his own attack. Brilliant. It shows that deep, practical seamanship combined with tactical thinking.
It really does. And his mindset going into the battle was pure Farragut. Absolute determination. He famously said something like, "Any man who is prepared for defeat would be half defeated before he commenced. No room for doubt."
And he reiterated his core philosophy, honed since Veracruz.
Right. Find the weak spot. He said, "Everything has a weak spot, and the first thing I try to do is to find out where it is and pitch into it with the biggest shell or shot that I have. Identify vulnerability, concentrate force, act decisively."
Okay, so August 5, 1864. The conditions are right. The fleet starts steaming into Mobile Bay. Monitors in the lead, wooden ships lashed together in pairs following. And then, almost immediately, disaster.
Yes. The lead monitor, the USS Tecumseh, commanded by the brave Tunis Craven, made a slight turn towards Fort Morgan, possibly to engage the Tennessee, which was waiting inside, but that turn took it just inside the marked channel, right over the Confederate torpedo field.
And it hit one.
Hit it directly. There was a huge explosion. The Tecumseh just lurched violently and then sank almost instantly. Bow first, gone in seconds.
Taking her commander and most of the crew with her.
Craven and nearly everyone aboard were lost. It was horrific, and it happened right at the head of the column, in full view of the entire fleet following behind.
What was the effect on the ships behind the Tecumseh?
Instant confusion and panic. The ship directly behind the Tecumseh, the Monitor Brooklyn, stopped dead in the water. Her captain was terrified of hitting another mine. This halted the entire column, right under the heaviest fire from Fort Morgan. Ships started bunching up. It was the moment of maximum crisis.
The whole attack stalling, threatening to unravel right at the start because of the fear of these unseen torpedoes.
Exactly. The fear was palpable.
And this is where Farragut delivers arguably the most famous command in American naval history.
This is the moment. Farragut is on his flagship, the Hartford, which was second or third in the line of wooden ships. He sees the column stalled, the disaster unfolding. An officer near him shouts a warning about the torpedoes ahead. And Farragut, needing to regain momentum instantly, makes his decision. The exact words are debated. "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," is the popular version, but the intent was clear. We cannot stop here. We go forward, regardless of the risk.
He chose the known danger of the fort's gunfire over the unknown, paralyzing danger of the torpedoes.
And the moral danger of hesitation. He ordered the Hartford to pull out of line, steam around the stalled Brooklyn, and lead the rest of the fleet directly through the area where the torpedoes were suspected to be.
Taking the lead himself into the minefield. And where was he physically during this?
This adds to the legend. To get a better view over the smoke and chaos, Farragut started climbing up the rigging of the Hartford, higher and higher.
Climbing the ropes like a young sailor at age 63.
Mahan notes the lightness with which he clambered up the rigging was proof of his remarkable physical condition. He got high up in the mainmast rigging, and an old quartermaster, worried the admiral might be wounded or lose his balance and fall to the deck, climbed up after him with a rope and lashed him securely to the rigging.
So you have this incredible image. The admiral, lashed high in the rigging, exposed to enemy fire, calmly directing his fleet through minefield, shouting his orders.
It's one of the most iconic images in naval history. Pure leadership by example, projecting absolute calm and determination for the most dangerous position.
And the fleet followed him through. They passed the forts, got inside the bay, but the fight wasn't over yet, was it? The CSS Tennessee was still there.
Right. Once the Union fleet was mostly inside the bay, past Fort Morgan, the Confederate ironclad Tennessee, commanded by Admiral Franklin Buchanan, who had commanded the Virginia against the Monitor at Hampton Roads, did something incredibly brave, or perhaps foolish.
What did Buchanan do?
Instead of retreating under the guns of Fort Morgan, Buchanan turned the slow but powerful Tennessee and charged directly at Farragut's entire fleet of wooden ships and monitors, one ironclad against dozens of enemy vessels.
Farragut called it a magnificent display of inconsiderate bravery.
He did. He was courageous but ultimately doomed. Buchanan might have hoped to ram and sink a few key Union ships, maybe even the Hartford.
How did Farragut respond to this lone ironclad charging his fleet?
Instantly. No hesitation. He saw the threat, but also the opportunity. He immediately ordered his wooden ships, not just the monitors, to engage the Tennessee. Ram her.
Wooden ships ramming an ironclad seems suicidal.
It was incredibly risky. But it was Farragut applying his principle. Concentrate force on the weak spot. The Tennessee was powerful, but slow and perhaps vulnerable to repeated impacts at close quarters. He ordered a swarm attack. Several Union ships, including the Hartford itself, turned and rammed the Tennessee repeatedly.
What was the effect of these rammings and the close-range gunfire?
It was brutal. The Tennessee was battered. Her smokestack was shot away, filling her gun deck with smoke. Her armor held up reasonably well, but the constant pounding started to take its toll. Crucially, several shots hit near her exposed steering chains running outside the armor casing.
Ah, the weak spot, just like the masonry at Veracruz.
Exactly. The steering chains were damaged, making the ship difficult or impossible to control. Buchanan himself was severely wounded by shell fragments. Pounded from all sides, unable to steer effectively, smoke-filled, the Tennessee finally surrendered.
The duel was over. Mobile Bay was won. The last major Confederate port on the Gulf was sealed.
The complete and decisive victory, achieved through meticulous planning, adaptation to changing circumstances, waiting for wind and tide, incredible personal bravery, and that defining Farragut characteristic, audacious, decisive action at the critical moment. #tag outro.
So, when you look back at that whole arc from the kid on the frontier, the midshipman fighting for his pig, the patient observer at Veracruz, the reluctant river warrior, to the admiral lashed in the rigging at Mobile Bay, Mahan's thesis really holds up, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. His success wasn't accidental. Mahan attributes it to a combination of things. Certainly natural genius for war, yes, but also that relentless belief in celerity, in speed and audacity, and underpinning it all, that defining moral quality, the fearlessness of responsibility.
He wasn't afraid to make the hard decision, even without orders, even when the risks were enormous. Port Hudson running the torpedoes.
He accepted the burden of command fully. He lived by that motto he apparently adopted from the French revolutionary Danton. L'audace et encore de l'audace et toujours de l'audace. Audacity, more audacity, always audacity. But it wasn't reckless audacity. It was audacity built on decades of preparation, observation, and professional mastery. He knew when and how to be audacious because he'd done the work.
But that level of intensity, that constant pressure, especially at Mobile Bay, it took a tremendous physical and mental toll.
Immense. Right after the battle, after the Tennessee surrendered and the immediate danger passed, Farragut actually fainted on the deck of the Hartford from sheer exhaustion and nervous strain.
Just collapsed.
Yes. He later wrote about the mental toll of that fight. What the fight was to my poor brains, neither you nor anyone else will ever be able to comprehend. It underscores the incredible burden these commanders carried.
After the war, he finally received the recognition he deserved. Promoted to admiral, hailed as the Union's greatest naval hero, and he embarked on that global tour.
Right, in command of the European squadron aboard the flagship USS Franklin. It was a sort of victory lap, but also diplomacy. He was received as a hero everywhere he went. And Mahan includes that touching detail about his visit to Minorca.
His father's birthplace? How was he received there?
With incredible enthusiasm. The local Minorcans crowded the shores, shouting, "He is ours! He is ours!" claiming this American naval hero as one of their own through his father's heritage. A really poignant moment connecting back to the very beginning of his story.
It really is an unprecedented career when you think about it. Achieving that level of fame and success so late in life, nearly 61 at New Orleans, 63 at Mobile Bay, it's a testament to what? Sustained diligence, moral strength, seizing the moment.
All of the above. It proves that greatness isn't always about youthful genius. Sometimes it's about decades of quiet, often frustrating preparation. It's about developing profound professional knowledge, building immense moral character and strength of will, so that when history finally presents the opportunity, you're uniquely ready to seize it and act decisively.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to maybe ponder. Farragut was the ultimate observer, right? He saw the potential of steam tugs and horizontal shell fire at Veracruz when others didn't. He lamented how the delay before Mobile allowed the Tennessee to be built a technological counter he had to overcome. He recognized game-changing developments that were dismissed by the routine prejudices of his time.
So the question for us today is, what might be the equivalent of steam power or horizontal shell fire now? What emerging technology or strategic concept, maybe in AI, cyber warfare, unmanned systems, hypersonic weapons, something else entirely, is currently being underestimated or dismissed by institutional inertia or routine prejudices? What unseen challenge or opportunity is out there waiting for a modern Farragut to recognize its true significance and grasp its potential, shaping the future of conflict or security in ways we can't yet fully imagine?
What's the thing we're missing that requires that Farragut-like foresight and audacity? Definitely something to think about. A fascinating deep dive today. We'll see you next time.